Hello and welcome to this brochure design Foleon online classroom. It's very nice to have you online with us, and we look forward to dive in. But before we do, you may be curious, what is the goal here? What will I learn? And why should I spend my day or my afternoon with you guys, with you Foleon? And the goal of this webinar is to really teach you some new design insights about brochure design. And a highlight we have during this webinar is we have requested examples and received a lot of links that we've looked into, and we will be sharing real examples and some feedback from our creative director, Vincent, on how to improve the brochures that are already live out there. So lots of learnings, lots of very practical tips and tricks for you to improve, or apply to your next brochure. Before we dive in, we did have a last minute change. So unfortunately, our creative director, Vincent, who put a lot of effort into preparing this webinar, had to cancel presenting it at the last minute. So we have been able to secure our digital designer, Joanna Mantilla, to present this webinar on his behalf. And we are actually sharing two perspectives. So Joanne, thank you so much for last minute jumping in and agreeing to present, plus also adding some of your takes on the designs. Welcome, and could you shortly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lavka. So hello, everyone. Really happy to be, stepping in here and sharing my perspective along with Vincent's expertise as well. So my name is Joanna. I'm one of the digital designers here at Foleon. And part of my role, if some of you may recognize me, I probably hosted your training call at some point. That is one of the things I do very frequently. So excited to be here and share some tips and let's talk about brochure design.
Great to have you. Also, you may know Joanne from some lessons that you've heard, and you're like, wow, this is such a great voice I'm listening to. It may have been Joanne recording that lesson. She does video edits and also creates custom Foleon docs for customers that require that as a professional service. And then who else is here with us? It's Joran. You know him because he is the mastermind behind the Help Center. I'm sure that you have read at least one of his informational Help Center articles. And if you haven't yet, I'm like, wow, you should, because they're great. Joran is not on camera with us today, but he is very active behind the scenes. You will see him in the chat. So please feel free to either drop your question in the chat on the bottom right, or if you have a question for Joanne, place it in the I have a question box on the top right, and we will get back to you. Joran is monitoring everything behind the scenes, so he may also pick some of those questions up in the chat just to increase the efficiency of this webinar. We'll take about 50 to maximum 60 minutes of your time. So turn off that phone, put your email notifications on hold, and maybe have somewhere to take notes ready because we will be sharing lots of insights. And after this webinar, everyone will receive the on-demand, so you can share it with a coworker or rewatch it afterwards. Before we dive in, I'm going to open a poll question. We are very curious, maybe before we dive in, to know who are you all online. So are you already creating your brochures in Foleon at the moment? Let us know by clicking on your answer in the poll. Yes, thinking about it, no, but please share with us what's stopping you in the chat or not applicable. In the meantime, we see the answers come in, but I'll leave the poll open for a little bit for you to click on it. And then in the meantime, I think, Joanne, maybe we can give you the stage and let's get started with your story.
Sure. Let's dive in. All right, let's go ahead, guys. All right. So we're going to talk about how to master brochure design. We have a lot to talk about. So thank you for joining. I see we have a decent amount of people joining. So hello, everyone. Welcome. We do have a lot of topics to cover today. We're really going to kind of start at the beginning. We're going to start with the brief history of brochures and kind of get that foundation started. And we're going to kind of take that all the way through in terms of what is Foleon's definition of brochures? How do we approach them creatively? What are some features we should be considering and double checking in our process? And lastly, we're going to go through 3 submitted brochures. So thank you guys for taking the time and sharing your work with us. We're going to share some tips there, what's working really great, some ideas for improvements and things like that. So let's get started with kind of starting at the beginning. What is a brochure? A brochure is really, it's a corporate marketing instrument to promote something, either a product or a service. And it's really kind of started within the print world. And as we all know, technology has taken us a far way. But at the roots, a brochure really originates from print. And it's usually stitched together, and it really derives from the French word brochure that literally translates to a stitched piece of work. So you may be familiar with some of the different ways we identify brochures. It could be kind of like in Europe, we kind of see the term kind of used for a multi-page stitched publication. And in the US, it's very common to kind of think of a brochure. Maybe the first thing that comes to mind is like a trifold brochure, little pamphlets, maybe like a travel pamphlet and things like that. So it's a very wide range of like a content type, which we'll talk more about.
Joanne, I think just those 2 introductions are so great. And just for you all, I'm based in the headquarters in Amsterdam, working from home today. But Joanne, where are you at?
I'm actually in Brooklyn right now. So we're a perfect example of this graphic right now.
Exactly. Yeah, so curious to see if you recognize that US perspective as well later on.
Awesome. All right. So what about online brochures? So kind of starting out at the beginning, talking about print and how technology's kind of taken us on this journey to where we're at today. Online brochures typically range from about 5 to 7 pages, maybe a little bit more, depending on what we're trying to sell or what we're trying to say. But if you need, let's say we think about that trifold brochure, right? Thinking about that in an online version, you can consider a 1-pager, which we'll talk about different templates and content types within Foleon as well. But so what are those different types of brochures? Let's go ahead and take a look at what we kind of consider this umbrella term of a content type. So a content type is essentially this umbrella for what houses these use cases. So a brochure is really spans the gap between catalogs and magazines. And there are a few different use cases that fall into that container. Company brochures, maybe a product brochure, maybe an event brochure. So these 3 kind of use cases just laid out and identified is going to serve slightly different purposes, right? But we're all still talking about a brochure at the root. So that is really the generic content type we're identifying right now.
Great. Maybe this is a good moment to recap on the results of the poll that came in. So the amounts of people that are currently using Foleon for brochures, before we dive into those 3 that you're going to specify, the vast majority is already creating brochures in Foleon. So that's 69%. About 25% is thinking about it. And then 2 people said, no, they're not creating it, and they'll share their perspective in the chat. So I'm curious if that's also actually coming in. If you haven't shared it yet, please let us know, guys. And 1 person said not applicable. So most people are already creating brochures in Foleon. It's great to know. Thank you all for voting.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys. It's great to get to know you guys a little bit more too. Okay. So about that content type, about brochures, and kind of going a little bit further there. So again, kind of bringing us back, brochures are really a tool to sell something, whether it's going to be the company itself, a range of products, an event, a service, anything like that. And at Foleon, we've actually created a system of templates for these purposes. which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But mostly a brochure is going to follow a company brand. It's going to support that brand. And it's also going to incorporate imagery and media to support the copy and the text that's being, and the narrative really that's being conveyed there. So what are the advantages of considering online brochures?
Great. I'm just going to jump right in here, Joanne, because if you're online and you have any questions so far, bring them in, because Joran is in the chat and we're online here. One is coming in, so can we throw that one in right now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, Lisa, thank you for your question. Is this webinar not discussing event brochure? Could you share a link to more info on how to do that? For example, we would need to set up Teams webinars, and it would be nice to create good-looking invites that allow people to sign up for the webinar directly in the invite.
Ah, lovely. And yes, so there is a special participant here. I'm not sure if they're on today. I hope you are. Hello if you are. But we do have one that we are going to review that is specifically an event brochure. So we'll see an example of one of our peers here, and we'll talk about the benefits of what they've already created and ways to kind of improve that a little bit more. So for sure.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Joanne. And can you then please share the advantages of online brochures?
Yes. Okay. So coming from the framework of Foleon 2 and what we're trying to solve here. So an online brochure, it's first and foremost, I think money really speaks well, right? It's one of the most cost-effective ways to produce this kind of content. Whether it comes down to the paper costs, the distribution costs, and all the other things in between. Cost effective is really one of the key things. Online brochures are also going to be a lot easier to update and manage compared to a printed piece. Or even an online PDF even, there's going to be some bottlenecks and having to rely on certain people to be able to make those revisions. And at least with Foleon, being able to put that into the hands of more business users and non-designers makes that a lot easier to manage. From a business perspective, online brochures have a much wider reach and are going to be, because they're going to be searchable online, therefore it contributes to your brand awareness and other business goals you may have. Online brochures are also going to be a lot more interactive and eliminates those hurdles to process lead generation. So I'm glad that it's kind of like a perfect of what Lisa was just bringing to line there in terms of getting that interaction from their audience. Being able to have your brochure online and maybe in something like Foleon, be able to put a form on the page and gather that insight from your readers, or to gate a page and be able to get that lead generation coming through is a lot easier to do in this format. And to that point, interaction is also going to help keep your reader more engaged. And while they're more engaged in that document, you'll be able to track them the whole time. So online brochures are a lot more intelligent. And with Foleon, you'll be able to track all that analytics of your readers as well. And to the last point, we can actually speed up and scale that content creation process too by not being able to reinvent the wheel every time, and be able to rework from where you last left off. And also maybe take some of the insights from the analytics you gathered and let that data influence your next design choice as well. So all of those factors, a lot to say in one word, but all of those factors really kind of help with the advantages of having your brochure online. So things to consider.
That's great. And maybe to loop back to Lisa, her question about collecting registrations for Teams webinars through Foleon Docs. You mentioned forms. That's a Foleon form or either an embed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, so that may work there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple different ways. If you have a CRM that you wanted to connect, that is possible. If you wanted to use Foleon's native one, that is possible. Or even working with third-party tools, like maybe you want to add a little quiz or a poll. You can incorporate something like a type form on a page with the embed. So there's lots of ways to bring that onto the Foleon doc pages.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so let's start talking about how can we set up the team for success. So we know the advantages, maybe we want to get started with this. So what are some things that we should keep in mind? One of the first things is going to be user roles. So I think one of the better things of collaboration is kind of knowing what your role is going to be in that collaborative process, and user roles, and within Foleon being able to assign a user role, and which comes with certain permissions, so everyone really knows what they're coming in to do, and that's established, and those expectations are established. But it's also going to help the production of the work as well, and even non-designers by using our content builder, which also works with our user roles and permissions. So if you're new, something to keep in mind is Foleon does have two editors. We have a more robust editor for design flexibility, which the designers are going to love. And then we also have our content builder. That's more of a template-driven editor, a little bit more guardrails in place that kind of keep you moving along the fast track, and be able to create content a lot easier. And with user roles, being able to know who's going to be doing what, where in that collaborative process, and having those tools to then help support those users can get to that end goal a lot faster. Next up, though, talking about scalability, right? We talked about that as an advantage as well. With Foleon, you have a template library, not only to choose a template to start out with, which we'll talk about next, but also to then save what you've created and then pull that out again and build onto it for the next one and be able to keep that ball rolling in a forward direction. And then lastly, right, a brochure is also going to be really closely aligned with your branding. So leverage the brand kit, and really at all times, leverage that brand kit, right? It's one less thing to have to worry about. And essentially the brand kit is going to help manage your company's branding on the account level so that right from the beginning, when you go ahead and start a Foleon doc, it's going to be on brand. And that's one less headache to have to worry about, especially the designers maybe trying to keep everyone online for the right branding. That is now been eliminated. So that centralized theming is super helpful for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think some interesting features. I hope everyone kind of was already familiar with them. I am curious though, also from your perspective as a designer, and maybe Vincent shared some particular ideas about this as well. What do you think would be the ideal process, kind of from the, hey, we need a brochure, to actually having one published? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, sure. We're going to talk about some kind of process ideas and ideation ideas in the next couple of slides, but kind of starting out with the brand kit and making sure that the brand is aligned and set up within the account is automatically going to get you started on the fast track, essentially. This way, when you go ahead and select a template, all of the interactive elements are kind of already outlined by the pro on the team who's got that branding kind of down. So that's one less thing to have to worry about. And then the next thing is, right, choosing that template to kind of get you started. So we're going to talk about that next.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, directing that creative process, perfect segue. One of the first things you're going to want to consider when you're getting started with your brochure is exactly how do you want your reader to interact with that narrative and that content. Do they need to kind of be taken through cover to cover, or should they kind of have the freedom to kind of jump as they wish? And that's kind of the general basis, thinking about a linear read, which is kind of that cover to cover, let me guide you through, versus a non-linear read that is a little bit more as a buffet, so to speak. You can kind of take your own route. So we roughly talk about these two navigation types to describe the way that we have kind of influenced our own templates. So all you have to do is kind of pick the right template to kind of move that forward. So this helps to direct the reader. And by you taking that moment to kind of ask yourself, how should my content be read and interacted with? And choosing that right path for your readers will make it a lot easier for your reader to then engage as well. If you're unsure how your reader should interact, then your reader's probably going to be a little unsure how to interact with your document. So that's a question to definitely ask yourself from the beginning in that ideation process, to be able to then approach that design more strategically. And so when you're looking at our templates, we have predefined 3 optimal layouts to consider. And these are kind of wireframes, which if you are familiar with our templates, they may look familiar. We'll take a look at a few in the next couple of slides, but we've identified 3 optimal layouts for your content. And all 3 content layout structures, as you see here, is the schematic approach. So the 1 column, this first one here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, if I'm hovering over it. Can? Okay, cool. So that first one is a 1 column read layout. And this is ideal. We've identified it's ideal for longer copy. The 2 column one here in the middle, we've identified for is more of a large visual, kind of a balance between some longer kind of chunked content mixed with some nice big visuals. And the last one here is our 3 column layout. This is for more stackable content like reports, guides, things like that. For brochures, we've really identified this middle one, the 2 column layout type, is ideal for most brochure templates. We've applied this kind of balance between text and image ratio. You can feel free to change whatever you need, of course, as what your needs are for a specific project might not be able to fit completely in there. So it's kind of a great starting point. So change as you need, but we do suggest to try to stick with 1 general template layout as much as possible. We'll talk about this more later, but consistency is something you want to keep in mind. Predictability and consistency is really important to kind of help keep your reader in line and kind of keep your reader comfortable reading the content as they're expecting that what's coming next is a lot easier to kind of read. If every layout's a little bit different, you can imagine kind of where to start and how to approach that. It's a lot more work for your reader. So setting that up from the beginning and keeping that consistent could be really helpful.
This is great. And the templates that you can find in your account, the default Foleon templates, they have been all set up and designed by Vincent, the creative director, who unfortunately we're missing, but Joanne, her story is just as powerful. And yeah, the thought behind it, how everything just stacks and fits together. I found it kind of like a breakthrough to understand that for any Foleon doc creation moving forward.
Exactly. Yeah. And what Vincent really has taken this methodology and applied it to the templates is really kind of taken like 33% of the like a third of the percentage of time to have to think about your layout has kind of be taken out with these templates.
Great. Can we have a look maybe at some examples?
Yeah.
Curious. Yeah, cool.
Okay. So here we are with our kind of bringing it back. We have our company brochure, we have our product brochure, we have our event brochure. And so each one of these has a certain purpose. And within these layouts, there are, excuse me, let me take a drink real quick so that my voice isn't so crackly.
That's all right. Joanne, we also sometimes hear something kind of like fiddle behind you, but I think you're sitting in our office and there is a door nearby, right? That we can kind of like hear in the background.
There is, yeah, right to my right. So I apologize.
That's all good. It's just sometimes helpful to know what we're hearing, right?
There's also a faint sweeping happening as well around the corner. So if anyone's hearing some bristles on a floor, you're not going crazy. There is someone sweeping outside.
We've probably all experienced worse. So you're great. You're good.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. So with each of these content types, each of these use cases within this content type of brochure, we've done something a little different for each of those. So obviously they may not be 100% perfect for what you need. So the purpose is all kind of a good starting point for you. But each of them has certain pages in there to kind of help with that narrative for that specific use case. Okay. So the first one is our company brochure. And shall I open this up and kind of do a little brief walkthrough as well? Sound like a good idea?
Yeah, maybe a quick walkthrough, and then after just high level showing these examples, I think we all want to really go to the real life examples.
Yes. Okay. So just as a quick example of let's start with the company brochure. Let me go ahead and hit the next button. And actually, for a better experience, let me make this an actual width of a screen here and not so small. There we go. So we have a nice cover. We have an introduction. We have a contents page. We have a first read. So notice that 2-column is coming through. So if we're kind of calling back to that little wireframe we saw before, here it is in our template layout. So we have that 2-column read. We have those little breaks in between. And these breaks are important to keep these kind of ideas going and keep these structures going because readers need a moment to pause and break as well. And so these page breaks are really helpful to kind of call out key information, maybe do a call to action, but it does help to keep the reader more aligned.
Great. Joanne, I have a great question from the audience that I think touches on this 2-column example.
Yeah.
It's the question is, in a brochure of 2 or 3 columns, we end up with scroll bars in some screens, which makes your publication unreadable. How to avoid that?
Fantastic question. And it actually comes down to one setting. And let me show you that setting real quick. I actually do have our editor open in another tab. So let me go ahead and share the editor screen real quick. And I can actually trigger this to happen real quick for us. So likely what you're seeing, I can do this with this cover at the moment. Notice we have spacer bars on the top and bottom here of this cover. There's a slight gap there, right? I have a little bit of leeway, but let's say I close that gap and I really push all of that spacing. I'll make it super extreme so we really see that. Oops, not up there. Here, let's make this like 400 pixels. What we're going to see if we put this in preview mode is likely going to see some scroll bars happening. Probably something like that, which is not ideal, right? We don't want that. So coming back, one, you always want to double check and make sure that your spacing isn't pushing too far, but also asking yourself, do I want this block? So we're kind of looking at one whole block at the moment. Do I want this block to fill?
Joanne, we're still seeing the preview, I think. Are you looking at the editor now?
Apologies. Yes, let's come back to the editor. Thank you, Lauka. So one of the questions you want to ask yourself real quick is your block that the content is sitting in. Do you want that block to fill your browser so that there's nothing falling below the fold of the screen? So no scrolling at all. We want that to fill really nicely. Then we want to make sure in our block setting, and I'll slide this to the middle. We want to go into the general settings of that block there. You want to make sure full height is turned on anytime you want that block to fill that browser screen. Now, when this is on, you need to be mindful then of your spacing. Spacing shouldn't overlap like that. Like we don't want any excess in there. Any excess in there is going to trigger that scroll to happen. So you want to take a look at the balance of your elements inside your columns and make sure that your spacing isn't pushing too far into those or causing too much restriction, because then it will trigger that column scroll to happen. Let's kind of pull that back. So that's case one. Case two is if the height of the block isn't super important to you, then the easiest thing to do is go into that setting and disable that full height. And disabling that is going to collapse the height of the block down to where your spacing is and where your content is. And then you could push the spacing more, because at that point, it's just going to push the block out and it won't restrict the block. So you won't see a column scroll happen after you've removed that setting. Okay.
Great. Yeah. Very thorough answer. And thanks for jumping into the editor to quickly show those settings.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of time, you were in the middle of showing the templates. Could we maybe just show them high level on the slides and then go to the examples?
Perfect. Sounds good.
Thank you.
let's come back here. Okay, so company brochure, we're going to highlight benefits, products, services, general overview here. Often, maybe there's going to be a CEO taking the floor on the introduction page, and then roughly the content is represented in like a 50-50 text to image ratio. So basically, all three layout structures can be applied to brochures. But again, we do advise that if you choose one layout type, to try to stick with that as the majority layout type. Okay, so again, uniformity, consistency, predictability is a good thing for reader engagement. Also, linear navigation suits this content type best, which means when you click on the button on the cover pages, it's kind of going to keep bringing you to the next page, and have that cover to cover kind of narrative. So within these templates, you're going to see, we can see that here on the overview, there's going to be back and forth previous and next buttons within a footer. The navigation arrows are native ones, will be active there too. And you're also going to have that cover page directing you forward as well. And there will be a contents page so that there's always a way to kind of navigate through. Okay, so that's the company brochure. Then we have the product brochure. It's a little bit more specific, right? So now we're really talking about selling a product likely. So here there's going to be pages to explain products in more detail, some larger image areas now, right? We probably want to really show the products. Often, again, there's going to be an intro page there. Maybe the CEO takes the floor again. And then those product pages are going to be more specific, maybe some more call outs there. Again, linear navigation read is what you're going to find in those templates as well, with footers kind of guiding through back and forth already set up. But there's also areas for call to actions as well, that maybe you want to drive that to a website or drive that to something else. You can also link to your buttons downloadable content, maybe some other types of resources you have. You want to connect to your Foleon docs, you could definitely do that too. And then lastly, we have the event brochure. So the event brochure is a little bit different. It's going to serve two purposes, really. And so one is going to be kind of an informative role and then there's going to be a practical role, right? So when we're talking about an event brochure, we kind of want to make sure we have all the information for that event in there, but maybe for each day, maybe if it's a multi-day event, let's say, there's also information there where the user can just jump to what they need. So this doc is going to be not so linear. So this is an example where we're not thinking about linear navigation per se. Maybe we could consider more of a nonlinear or semi-linear possibly, where it's going to serve two purposes. So notice the cover looks a little different too, right? We don't just have that one call to action driving us forward. We have four. And that serves the purpose of, if this is my first time going to this event and the event has not happened yet, maybe I do want to go cover to cover and kind of see everything. But maybe it's already day one. Day one's over, and maybe day two is coming. When I come back to this document, I have the option now on the cover to just jump to day two or day three. So thinking about, again, bring us back to that first question of how should my reader be consuming this content? In considering that experience from the beginning can really help align the content creation process. Okay.
This is great. Thank you so much, Joanne, for sharing these examples. Yes. In terms of time, I suggest to skip the next topic. Joran, would you be so kind to maybe quickly look in the Help Center for a link about editions? Because it's very valuable for users to know about that when it comes to brochures, but then they can read the Help Center article, and then we can use Joanne here to show us some examples.
Yes.
Before we do, thank you so much for sharing your examples. We ask you all to do it, and like overwhelmed with the amounts of examples, even 5 minutes until the webinar started, I got emails in. So I'm sorry for not having responded to all of you yet, but I will. We have selected certain examples to share during this webinar, and also we'll share a few general best practices and design tips. Joanne, are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's get to those examples.
Cool. And then maybe after the first, we'll pause again for a few questions because they are starting to come in now.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to skip these for now. Tips on shared content. We'll talk about best practices at the end, which we could probably call back to these. But let's take a look at our first one. So the first one is an event brochure. So I think our first question was Lisa, right? So Lisa, this is for you. So let me go ahead and open this up. Thank you so much. If the folks from RightShip are here today, this is an awesome example. Let's go ahead and go in. All right. Can we see that on your side?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here is an event brochure from RightShip, as you can see. So this is the Leaders Forum. We got the date. It's already passed. I hope it went really well. But right here on the cover, let's talk about navigation, right? So right here on the cover, we're already calling back to that idea of semi-linear navigation. I can just move forward. I can see that we still have those page arrows active there, but I have a lot of, this is basically an index, like a call, not a call to action, so table of contents right here. So if this isn't my first time coming to this doc to help me through this event, I can just jump to what I need without having to really search for it. So thank you, because as a reader, there's not a lot of work for me to have to find what I need. So I feel like that was taken into consideration. So that's awesome. Overall, though, again, like that navigation is very clear. Let me also pull up these notes as well. Alrighty. So great use of dynamic content. Let's kind of like dive through here. Notice some of these features. So I love to see that we're also utilizing some of our newest features too, so that kind of help support our linear navigation as well. So they have the page sneak peeks enabled. So as a user, I can hover over these and get an idea of what's coming next. And I also see that there is the progress bar. It might be really small on the share screen though, I apologize, but
we see it well, actually.
Oh, you see it well? Great. So this has also been activated too. So as I'm going through, I kind of know how much I've consumed of this document already by seeing that bar kind of continue. But take a look at these videos. We have background videos on here. We have the data visuals going, even what looks like a GIF image, I think. That's awesome. Really kind of working with media and text. And this is a type of page we call like our timeline page layout. And I love how they've incorporated the visuals, the motion, as well as some of the graphic elements to the text elements you can add, like these sidebars and things. Lots of videos in this one, really great. And another thing I want to call out in this document, I'll go to the next page while I do that. Every page at the bottom, instead of using a back and forth kind of linear navigation footer where we have a previous button and a next button, they have a call to action at the bottom of every page to drive me to go subscribe for more. Another idea there could be if we really want to like boost registration, maybe at the bottom of every page, it could be linking me to a registration form. That could really help drive that call to action forward too. Here we have, again, great animated visuals, which is awesome for this quick kind of like how to get set up with finding some images from myself from this event, which I think is really cool. Great work there. Let me call back here.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a beautiful, beautiful brochure. A lot of great things to call out from it, which you're absolutely doing well. Are there any tips that maybe to the creators of this brochure, are there any areas for possible improvement?
Yes. Let's actually talk about a couple. One, so the layout is often about shape, right? So when we're talking about layout, we're talking about shape. And so kind of like a little bit of a design savvy thing. But to define shape, you kind of need white space, or what we call like positive space and negative space. And so something that I think could be driven a little bit further is working with with spacing a little bit more and kind of pushing layouts a little bit more. I see here we kind of have everything kind of really top aligned. This could probably be balanced out a little bit more. We could even consider breaking this up a little bit more so it's maybe divided up by like morning and afternoon, if that's something you'd wanted to do. So there are options, of course, for sure. And I think on the next page, we can talk about that a little bit further as well. No, not this one. Maybe it's this one.
It's a nice 3-column example.
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. This area right next. Great 3-column example where we have kind of the name, we have the image, we have the brief text there. Nice, brief, little concise block. But in terms of like pushing the white space a little bit more or like negative space, I think this area, this block specifically is a call to action block where it could be a little bit bigger. I think we could actually just go into the block setting there, turn on full height. And as we're scrolling down this page, we're just met with a full screen of this really awesome dynamic background video. It's going to likely make me pause for a moment to see what this is about before I move on. Even inside of the text boxes, it's still a little bit tight. And just these little things, the details actually do matter. And just feeling like this is a really consistent design and I want to just kind of like sit and look and see more. So just those areas that kind of push white space, definitely keep that as a forefront.
Thank you so much. So overall, beautiful brochure, very well done. And there are definitely some minor design details that could be improved on. That full height block for the call to action is a great suggestion. Could I maybe from the audience ask a follow-up question on full height that you did look into in the editor before?
Yeah.
So is there a way to apply the full height scrolling setting to columns inside a block and not just an entire block?
Ooh, so I think the distinction there is that full height setting will only specifically trigger for a column. Am I hearing that? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
100%.
Is there a way to apply the full height scrolling setting to columns inside a block and not just an entire block?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I was understanding that correctly. Yeah, so just the distinction there. Let's just go ahead and take a look at the editor one more time. I'll go ahead and share this tab. So what's important to keep in mind when we're talking about page structure or like the structure of a Foleon doc is your columns are always connected to your block. It's part of the same system. So as we go for, and actually let's not look at the cover. Let's look at something that has a few more blocks here, like this first read on page 4.
Great. And when you're in the editor, I have a follow-up question once you're done with this one.
Yeah, sure. So again, here we are with a scrolling page. So there's going to be more than one block. So I have block 1, block 2. The columns inside of a block are always linked to that block. So if we wanted a certain experience in the column, likely there's some things we're going to have to do with the block. For example, if I wanted this to scroll, or maybe down here where we have some more text, let's say I added this over here. Maybe I'll give a little bit of space in between there. So one column is really long. And right now, when I move that, notice how the block has just stretched for me. And that's because full height is not on this block. And let's confirm that. I'll slide this over. Full height is indeed off. And I can tell that automatically just because by moving something over, it's pushed the block for me. Let's go ahead and turn it on. So we see something kind of jump there, but not an immediate change. But what we will see as I scroll down is now my block has essentially like a cap height. And I see that navigation scrolling there. So again, your column's always connected to your block there. And if I move that back over, now my block just has a little extra space because we have it at full height. And the other thing you may want to do is, let's say I wanted this background color to be, let's just make it blue for a moment. And let's say I want this box, this column that's inside my block to be this kind of white. Maybe I'll give this a little bit of space on the sides so that my text doesn't look so strange in there. And let's say I wanted to make my column box kind of floating in here. Again, I need to rely on my block here because my column lives in the block. So if I want to change how the column sits in there, I need to come to my block spacing for a moment. And I need to tell the block to tell its column that it can't be so close to its own edges. Okay. So there's really, there's a partnership between the column and the block at all time. Okay.
Great. I think this is a very wonderful explanation. To tell the block, to tell the column, to not sit all the way to the edges.
Yeah, I always try to think of it as a conversation because they're connected.
That's wonderful. Follow-up question, unrelated, but please stay editor. Where do I find that button with 2 arrows, the next and previous?
This one right here.
I don't see where your mouse is right now, but yeah, that one. Yeah.
Okay. Our native arrows. Okay. So for these, if they happen to be disabled in a certain document for you, you want to come up to your menu and you want to go down to the doc settings. Okay. And when you're inside of your doc settings, there's a navigation section where you can jump to. And this is where you can really look at all the options and disable or enable certain things, customize things. But for those specific buttons, we actually want to slide down to the section that's called page arrows. And if you want them, you want to make sure that this is toggled on. Again, if you want it disabled, you can also turn it off. But with it on, you can also choose its position. So you noticed in the our right ship example, they had the center right position enabled. So the buttons were floating on the side there. So you have 2 options, but this is where you can turn that on and off.
Great. And where do you turn the hover on and off that appeared in the right ship example?
Oh, that would be right here too. So right below that, you see new page sneak peek. So if I turn that on, you'll see, do I want that full visual one, or do I just want like the tooltip, which is really like the title of the next page popping up for me? So that could be enabled here, and I'll keep that on. I'll go ahead and hit save. Always hit save when you're making a change in your doc settings before you exit out. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back in and do it again. And now when I hover, although I'll have to probably refresh here, you'll see that popping up. But the hover, notice as I'm hovering back and forth, there's like a hover state on those arrows. That is a stylistic choice, which can be done on the brand kit.
Great. Perfect answer. I think it's time for our next example.
Yes, let's hop back over there. All right, so let's go ahead and share here. Okay. All right, so let's skip over to our next one. So here we have Lively. Thank you, if Lively, you're here, for a super awesome, clean looking document with a really great navigation style. This is specifically a benefits brochure. Let me go ahead and open that up for us. And I'll go ahead and share tab. And yes, I'll accept all the cookies. Okay. All righty, so this is a benefits brochure. Also, I would kind of consider this in the bucket of more aligned with like a company brochure. It's kind of like about the company or about what the company can do or a service, even to its own employees. So I mean, it's more of an internal use case. But we do have a linear read here to an extent where even on this cover, I can go ahead and start reading. But what it does, a little bit different. It doesn't bring me to the next page. It brings me down because there's actually more to consume on this first page here. It's more of like a landing page with a little bit more information. Though I think one tip could be to consider is this could be broken up into a few extra pages as well. It doesn't have to be one scrolling page. This is a great little overview that maybe could be a brief intro page. But what I do really like about this is there are buttons nested throughout using overlays. So this is one of the first examples where we're really seeing overlays being used, and they are linking to each other. So we have some like a carousel effect going on here. And something I just want to highlight and say, overlays can be a really great feature to be utilizing to help chunk up your content, which is a fancy way of just saying dividing up your content in ways so that your reader can really kind of dive in a little bit deeper and have that more engaging interactive points of your document. and then I can exit out and come back to that main page and continue. And so we have a little bit of an about Lively section. And at the bottom, a very clear navigation driving me forward to the next page. So what is next? Benefits and solutions. Let's learn more. Lovely. And I'm there. So it's very clear for me to know where I'm going in this document. And if all else fails, we do have the page navigation arrows are still enabled. And they've also given us the page tabs in the nav bar as well. So even if this might be also a doc where as an employee, I may be coming back to frequently. So it may not be my first time. So I can go ahead and just jump around, which is also really nice.
These are all great points. And this is a beautiful document and great images and color use as well. Mm-hmm. We have about 10 more minutes before we really have to knock this off. So could you maybe bring up any sort of improvement for Lively?
Sure. So let's kind of do a nitpick thing since we're looking at this right now. This header, great imagery, although we are cutting off their heads a little bit much, and I'm not quite sure the back end of what this image looks like. But two things I can identify is we are working with a half height block. So the way the image probably is their heads are probably closer to the top of the image there. So within Foleon, and what might be helpful is let me jump to the editor for a moment. Just to be able to show you this live time, is when you're in the editor and you're working with a background. Let me go ahead and open up my block background so you can see this. Our default for our focus point, if you weren't aware, you can change the focus point of your backgrounds, is always going to be set to center middle. For that image, I think we may want to set that to the middle top just to make sure that the top of the image is in line and in focus first so that we don't get too much clipping of the heads and the faces there. That might be one of the best bets. Generally speaking, though, as I come back to our example, Lively's example here, is that focus can also be really helpful for positioning your backgrounds on tablet and mobile too. So I would suggest that here to try that out. Let's also consider actually, let me go ahead and jump to one. Yes, here we have the broker quotes. So we're using, it seems like, the button styling set on the brand kit. What might be useful here is to actually change or make a specific design for your buttons, specifically for those overlays for testimonials and quotes, so that within the document, we get familiar, right? Consistency and predictability. We kind of get familiar with what buttons are for those testimonial overlays. So when I see that button come up, I'm like, I know what that's going to do now because I've already experienced it on page 1 and maybe page 2. So that's something to consider as well, stylistically. Color and position and style and things like that can kind of help drive the narrative and navigation for your readers as well.
That's great. I would really love to do the third one that you've prepared as well. Could we speed it up a little bit so we have time for a question that I'm waiting for and a summary at the end?
Sure, let's go ahead.
These examples are just so great to see.
There's so much to talk about with these. They are really great examples, and I wish we had all the time in the day, guys. I apologize.
So for the next one, maybe just in 1 minute, what is great and what is a tip?
Ooh, okay. So we have a project brochure here. And I think one of the biggest things you're going to see as I switch us over to their example is the media. Now, this does seem like a type of project where media is driving this conversation and this service and this product. So this is definitely part of the sell for sure, and is really driving this. So imagery is amazing here. And as I come into the next doc, you're just going to continue to see the images really pushing forward there. But on top of that, general styling, the fonts, the colors are all working with the images, and it's one complete cohesive narrative. Some tips though, let's go ahead and take a look. So we have a very specific navigation here in contrast of what we've seen so far. It is very linear, it's very rigid, and that can be good, but sometimes bad when we're thinking about our mobile user. So one of the things about Foleon and a lot of web content is we do have to think about our more mobile devices as well as our desktop devices. So what they've done is they've taken the contents page and labeled that as the menu. So we're always coming back to this page as like the hub, and driving me to other parts of the page here. But notice there's no page numbers. I don't actually know how many pages I'm going through. And for a mobile user, at the bottom of the pages, also notice there's no footers driving any more navigation. So for a mobile user, it might be confusing to know where you're at. So something to consider for your mobile users as well. A little too rigid maybe there, but something to test out. Also for this page, major thing I would consider is, so since this is really driving the navigation, right, this page is very important. These are all the projects I can jump to, but as I slide down, we also have delivered projects or completed projects to explore. What I would suggest doing is changing this layout a little bit so that the reader understands that these are not clickable, because at the moment it's mirroring up here where these are clickable. Down here it's not. And I also I think me and Vincent both kind of jotted down the same note of like, I thought I could click on these, but really this is the only call to action there. So I actually did, if we have a moment.
I'm gonna cut you short, Joanne. Can you wrap it up with the final point?
This is the final point. I did a little example here, what I think would work really well. This is kind of mimicking your design at the moment where we have everything really wide with the call to actions. And then we have this. I think bringing the edges in here and changing up the page layout where it's not so wide will help the reader kind of know this is different than the section above on the page. And the only setting that's really driving that is this setting right here inside your block setting where that full height was, the other one. Just go ahead and add that, disable the full width and bring those edges in, make it look a little different. And I think that'll be an easy solution to kind of help that out.
This is fantastic, Joanne. And maybe final tip to wrap it up, just in general, because I had a look at all the examples as well, not as a designer. I did miss the favicon of several of the examples that came in. So if you shared your example, maybe check if you have a favicon installed, and if you don't, easily add that in your brand settings. Yeah. Joanne, final question from the audience.
Yes.
What is your work process? In what form do you receive the source text to produce your brochures? Do you give a PowerPoint mask, for example? Not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Corrections are made directly in Foleon by the different users. Thank you. Okay. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like, how do we kind of work in that collaborative process with other team members? And I think that could really be driven a lot easier within Foleon, given the certain account you may have, something to kind of see if this is something that is within your package. But if I come back really quickly to the share tab, your review mode could be really helpful here as an internal review process, as you're kind of working with the template, maybe putting some text in. Being able to open up the review mode, I'll share this tab as that's opening up and I'm explaining it. You can be able to put, a nice little description, little GIF there to kind of drive that conversation. So you can put little bubbles on certain areas, send a quick comment to your colleague. They'll get an email that you've added a comment somewhere so they can go in and review that. And you can actually view how many comments are on that Foleon doc from the project folder level. So I think just to kind of remove one additional piece of tech in this process, of course, PowerPoint could work, right? Or slides could work. But if this is something you can do within the system, it definitely makes that a lot faster.
Great. Thank you for pulling that example as well. And if your question hasn't fully been answered, maybe let us know in the chat right now. We connect you to the customer success manager to take you through that a little more later. Joanne, we're going to wrap this up. Could you maybe share a quick 3-word summary of this webinar?
Ooh, 3 words.
Challenge, but 3 words about brochures.
Brochures. Brochures are selling something. They're driving your brands, and
well, we've definitely seen them evolve over the ages. They used to be a stitch work. They're different, but digital content is definitely driving sales. You can see analytics and integrate a lot of different tools, either link to your website, add a form, whatever. I hope you all learned a lot. Just before we let you go, thank you for clicking the poll that I opened in between Joanne and her story. So does the team responsible for brochures have access to Foleon? Let us know. Yes, thinking about it. No, or maybe not applicable if you don't do any brochures at all. The poll is open for a little bit longer. And also, I'd like to point out to you that we have a next webinar coming up at the end of June. It's a little while out, but it's our most popular webinar and it's recurring quarterly. It's about the latest product updates. So Joran, I believe, will share the link in the chat for you to be able to sign up as you are online right now. Joanne, thank you so much for joining this webinar with us. Thank you for joining it last minute. And final thought on your end? Great.
Oh, final thought for me? Yeah, just for everyone to consider, I think, when it comes to getting started with your brochures and any of your content, is just kind of taking a moment to jot down some just basic questions on like, what is my content? What is the layout that I think is suitable? What experience do I want for my reader? And how do I really want to drive that brand to go throughout? And those, I think, 4 questions could really help just kind of align you for your projects.
Thank you so much for joining. Great insights. Also, you as an audience, thank you for asking your questions. Thank you for sharing your examples. And thank you for spending your time to watch this webinar with us. I hope this online classroom has given you lots of insights to improve the brochures you're already creating. In a moment, I'm going to stop this webinar and you'll be redirected to our survey. If you have maybe 2 spare minutes left, feel free to share your thoughts and experience with us. We continuously try to improve our webinars, and we will be sending you the follow-up of the on-demand version of this webinar. Thank you all so much.